Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 30, as in 30. Very exciting. I think I was probably this excited for my 30th birthday as the 30th episode of Genn and Millie. We're a Gen Xer, that'd be me, and a millennial, that would be Tess. Share the strength-based perspective through which we view the world. We are your hosts, Allison and Tess. Talking is really hard for me today, so I'm apologize in advance.
We also want to be really upfront. This is, I think, our third official take of this. I am still learning. I am very much in the learning process, and I think I've realized I'm just beating myself up because the first take that we had was awesome. We had such a good conversation. I was so excited about sharing it with people. And when I could not adjust it correctly, when the microphone wasn't picking us up well, I was really beating myself up about it. And I was like, gosh, why was I so upset with myself? Because I didn't want to waste your time. I didn't want to waste my time. There were so many things, but when I drilled down to it, I want to get to a level of mastery. My learner wants to get to mastery. And I naturally, in the past, have always been able to get there quickly.
Where's Maximizer for you?
Maximizer's 22 for me. 23 for me. When it was 22.
So I do want to strength spot. I did see your learner hurting. And the other thing I want to make sure that you know, there is no conversation that you and I have that is ever wasted time.
Correct.
You are never wasting my time. When we have a conversation, I am learning. I am walking away with a higher level of engagement. We may have taken 3 takes at this, but I'm still as energized about it as I was the first time. Now, if I came in here and said, oh, I need a coffee and this is exhausting, not that I ever say that to anybody, but if you would ever note me saying something like that, I did not mean it that way. I feel energized about talking about it because one of the reasons we wanted to do this today is because we just experienced some high level of engagement in a community. Yeah. And as we were driving home, we did not want to waste any time, which sometimes we do.
Oh, yes.
When we don't get to this right away, we waste time by not capturing the moment. So I don't care if this takes us 25 takes. I want to capture our energy about it so that we don't forget these things.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a little bit of a shift today and talk about our experience in a community. One of the things I wish we would have done, and I wish I was better at, this is where my learner kind of steps up and gets frustrated with my age and inability, that I don't know how to run a camera better. And if I did, we'd record some of these moments and then we'd have really incredible podcasts because we'd be able to cut to the clip. And I know that to do that would take a lot of effort and energy, and it would cause a lot of frustration for me. So I will readily admit that sometimes when there are things that I'm not good at, I know I won't reach a level of mastery, I kind of step back and say, okay, maybe I should go back to the way I was doing it before. And you may have noticed that about me.
100%.
So I would love for us to start in that strength spotting with the way that our trip to Ainsworth began. And I mentioned earlier, and I'll mention it again and again and again, I am very grateful for the grace that you extend. So you probably now know that if things are not going well, I will revert back to the previous. And you have allowed me to do that sometimes. It may frustrate you, I'm sure it does. But you allow me to do that until I get to a level of comfort. So we had some pretty significant takeaways in the day and a half of strengths training that we did in Ainsworth. And I think a big component were where we could improve.
Yeah.
We both talked about, we need to really change this PowerPoint up.
Yeah.
And I think when I said that to you, I said, wow, we need to really change some things in this PowerPoint. There was this flooded look of relief
on my face because of the pixelated logo that's been driving me nuts for the past 3 years.
She finally opened the gates to change. So I recognize that grace that you extend, and I recognized it when we began our trip. When I am getting ready to leave and start planning for a community, my level of anxiety just goes up a notch. Sure. And part of the way that I get out of that anxiety is to heal through questions.
Sure.
And if I can vocalize my questions and get my questions out, I mean, that's literally a phrase I use all the time. Can I just get my questions out? I feel so much better. And I'm at ease, and I can be my best self, and I can present at my best self when those questions have been allowed. You don't have to have all the answers, but just to let me kind of flesh through them. So I want to strength spot that individualization that you have that allows and extends such grace to others when they're in their balcony in their basement of their strengths, and you just let them be and let them be who they are. That's really a gift that you give a lot of people, Tess. And then the other strengths I want to spot are not just context, as we've not just context, but context plus strategic. So when we were traveling between Taylor and Bassett, I know that Tess wanted to stop at a historical marker. And I will tell you, I don't believe I've ever stopped at a historical marker ever. No.
What?
No, I don't think I have. I'm sorry. Is that disappointing to you? It is, isn't it?
Very. It's okay.
She has tears in her eyes. You can't see it. But I would stop for a music festival, a concert, a record store. I would stop for a party, or if there is a restaurant that has a lot of people around it, I'd probably stop for that just because I wanted to see what was happening. I'm not likely to stop for a historical marker, and I think Tess knew that. And because I was driving this time, we went right on past it, but I did note it. And I noted that you probably wanted to know about it, and so you Googled it. And I would love for you to share what you learned.
So this historical marker, and I will stop at every scenic lookout. I will stop at historical markers. I will. Okay. So I think I love how you coupled my context with strategic, because I think for me it was a little more adaptability was where I wanted to go with it. But I ended up having to go context strategic because I didn't have the ability to stop, because I knew you didn't want to. And even if I was driving, I wouldn't have, because I know that's not honoring to you. Not that it's not honoring, but it's not how you would necessarily like to spend the time. If it was just me, 100% I would have stopped.
How do you get anywhere?
Oh, so there's a level of decision making about when the best time to stop is. Knowing that we had enough time, I would have done that. And knowing that there was a time, if I have a time I need to be somewhere and I'm running ahead, I will stop and do that. If I am not running ahead or I don't have a time, I just want to get there, that's different. So there is a Danish windmill that's about 10 miles off of I-80 in Elkhorn, Iowa, that I have wanted to stop at. I have driven past probably 20 times now since living in Omaha and commuting back to Minnesota to visit my family. I have never once stopped, because I never need to be somewhere when I'm going to Minnesota. And so I just kind of want to get there, right? Because I have family on the other end. If I needed to be in Minnesota for a meeting at 6 p.m. and I knew that I had half an hour, I would stop.
Oh. So your adaptability doesn't stop. So because you don't have to be somewhere, you don't stop, but when you do have to be somewhere, you figure time in for it?
I figure time in for it. Isn't that weird? It's probably very contrary.
That is so strategic adaptability.
Yeah.
So I just want people to know that when Tess is in the car with you and she sees a museum, the words museum pop off the sign, and her tone and volume and excitement is as if she won the lottery.
It's a little scary.
Museum.
I saw one and we didn't get to stop at Ainsworth, but
I
wouldn't stop.
It's very helpful to understand that a little bit better. But I did want to note it because when she looked up the historical marker,
yes,
this is my connectedness. The beginning of our trip.
Okay, so let me jump in. Okay, so the historical marker was about this homestead in this small town that was established in this area of Nebraska, in this site, and there are very little remnants of it today. And so it was a little bit of this reenactment, rebuilding of this very early settlement in the Nebraska territory. And so it was about this family who started a ranch there, and people started moving around, and it was this very nice, like, home on the prairie kind of story that I read, because I thankfully via Google found the exact historical marker, so I wasn't too sad we didn't stop. But then I'm reading this aloud to Allie, and I'm learning as I'm reading, and all of a sudden I get to a sentence, and it said, and the two brothers were murdered. And I was murdered. And I was like, oh man, for a plot twist. And so I just was like so surprised, because I'm reading this out loud, and I'm learning as I'm reading, so I was just kind of shocked, and you probably heard it in my voice, like, oh, they were murdered.
And then on the end of our trip, this is about a 4.5 hour drive for us. At the end of our trip, we started talking about one of Tess's favorite podcasts, which is My Favorite Murder. And both of us were so engaged in the conversation. Mm-hmm. It was as if we had just gotten in the car from the beginning of the trip.
And I think, and so this was, on our way home at the very end. So this is after like spending 9 hours in the car together over 2 days, which is, I love you, Allie, but that's a whole lot of time with one person. Just for me, my introvert self that loves to be by myself. But so it started when you were talking about the Stones tickets you were getting and how much you'd be willing to pay for Stones tickets. Mm-hmm. And I was saying that I got tickets to a live show of this podcast. And for anyone who's not familiar with My Favorite Murder that might be listening, I do not fantasize murder. I do not promote murder at all. Actually, yes, my seminary student in me would say, "Oh my goodness, that's a little scary." But I, being a sociologist by trade, we study crime and deviance a lot. And there is something fascinating about, number one, the way a society will construct normative behavior, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. What is acceptable behavior within a society, and that looks different everywhere, cross-culturally, cross-linguistically. But then there is also the very interesting study of when people break those norms, and that's what we would call crime and deviance from normative behavior, and oftentimes it's prosecuted and we have mass incarceration, and that's a whole nother topic that you can meet me on a different podcast for. So I think there's something about crime that's really interesting to me. So I want people to know that I'm not like a psychopath or sociopath that loves like to learn about crime, but I do enjoy learning about crime because there is something pretty fascinating about the state of mind people are in order to commit something like that. And so I loved that conversation home because I felt like it was your input.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
That was coming up with all these Nebraska murders that I have never heard of.
Well, I don't really even know that well, but I could remember the names, and it was kind of surprising to me, and could remember, and then we had a whole conversation about Gary Hart and the new movie that's coming out about him, and I mean, we just went into a completely unrelated to the past day's conversation that actually tied back into the beginning of our trip. Yeah. And that is literally, as they say, full circle. And I think part of the reason that we're able to do that has a whole lot to do with engagement. So when we're talking about engagement, this was a powerful moment for Tess and I. The second we got there, the way that we were greeted by Lisa, the way that the day and the day and a half evening was set up, was completely honoring Lisa's strengths, but she was also considering ours.
Very much
and
so.
I got to chat with Connie right away and hear a little bit about the connections that Connie and I had. Connie has high connectedness just like I do. And I am sure, Tess, you are exhausted by being with me, whether it's 9 hours in the car or just in my presence, because I'm always trying to find the connections.
Oh, my goodness. And I think I've had to, rest my eyes from all my eye rolling. Because, oh, my goodness, every single person she met in Ainsworth, Nebraska, she had a connection with from somewhere.
This time it was Broken Bow, Exeter, Doane, Hebron. And what's amazing to me is that all of those connections come from small town connections.
Yeah.
And we had a great conversation about small town life. We had such a wonderful experience at the Sandhills Lounge with Jim. For every job, there's someone who loves to do it, and Jim loves his job, and he was hilarious and fun. And we just felt great about being in his energy.
Yes.
He was witty, kept us on our toes. Mm-hmm. And I think later on when we were talking with students about strengths, we were kind of trying to help them think about for every job there's someone that loves to do it. Mm-hmm. And so being in the energy from the get-go of Lisa and Connie, who set the stage, their level of engagement with one another and with us was fantastic. And then we were able to do some immediate strength spotting with Curtis. Mm-hmm. Curtis came in, and one of the things I really appreciated is that Curtis leads with competition. He owns it. And it was a great opportunity for me to see competition on someone else who is in a career that they love. And because I don't understand a lot about competition, and because my son has it as his number one, it's sometimes hard for me to understand. And it's hard for me to see what that will look like in the future.
Sure.
And so to be able to see Curtis, who loves his job and is clearly good at it and is respected for his job, leading with that competition strength, it really helped me to see what future Sean might look like.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because his job, he is the elementary school principal, and I found it very fascinating because he has high competition. I think it was his number 2, and their high school principal also has competition in his top 5. And I found that really fascinating because competition isn't a rare strength by any means. It's not in the least common to appear in Gallup's database, but it's one we don't encounter often, I think, because of the circles that we run in.
Right.
With mentoring, with our personal lives, we don't just run into a lot of people with high competition. I've met quite a few people that have high competition, and oftentimes they are in the private, in the business sector, in the corporate sector. Oftentimes they are executives, they are high-ranking people within their businesses, and I think people with competition might be drawn to that kind of environment because there are very clear measurable outcomes. People with competition love to be able to measure up, see where their progress is against somebody else's. And I think one person that I met with high competition was a vice president of Carhill, and worked a lot with construction. Another one was one of the regional managers of a bank in the southeast part of the United States. And just very interesting to see how their competitions very, very clearly were integrated with their roles. They were very focused on numbers, very focused on measuring last year's versus this year's, measuring their region versus another region's. And I think sometimes, and I think we've talked about this, we can think strengths look a certain way.
Right.
And it was a really good, so much of this last day and a half was a really good experience of, I feel like, practicing what we preach.
Yes.
Right? That I feel like is like a mantra of the last couple days.
Looking at the slides and actually having real life examples where someone is teaching us what those slides mean.
Yep. So like the very first slide after we go through the opening activity is about how Don Clifton, through his research, found that there is not one specific strength set, but those people that are deemed most successful have the ability to recognize their strength and maximize on it to reach their full potential. And I think Curtis was such a good example of that. And, even though he's just getting into administration, he's a very good example of someone that has a strength set that if you just looked at that strength set, someone might guess that he's in a corporate sector.
Right.
But he's not.
Right.
Because we are more than just our strengths, right? We are our life experiences, our passions, our values, and those can collide really well with our strengths. And so I think it was a really good example of knowing that you don't need a certain strength set to do a certain job. That really, to be successful at your job, you just need to know your strengths and maximize on them, and then get the right people on the bus with you that have different strengths.
And I think what we witnessed is so many people in the right seats of the bus and on that bus. We were just perplexed at the level of engagement. It was so much fun. We had a great conversation with Wade, who did such a remarkable job pointing out so much observation, which also I think is a great indicator of engagement when people are super observant. And Wade noticed that I mentioned Wizard of Oz in a couple different nuanced ways, which I didn't even realize. And Lisa pointed out the double lettering of our names, which we had never, ever heard. I also had never, I want to note this, I heard from Jim at the Sandhills Lounge that there was no way that I had a 22 and 18-year-old and that I was aging well. And because I never hear that, that was really lovely to hear. That kind of recognition, which I know he probably was completely joking, but wine and cheese and me aging well is nice to think about. But also just the level of things that people noticed, and they noticed out loud. So it's one thing to notice, and then it's another thing to give recognition on what you notice. And I think that group was so full of recognition and awareness and engagement. So as we typically do, we like to get together after our training and talk about what did we notice. And what we noticed, I mean, we just walked away saying, wow, what a group of engaged people. And what do you think the recipe is? What's the indicator? I wonder what creates that here. And then the next day, literally the next day, I'm doing strengths training, looking at the Gallup success model, thinking, oh, wait, I know what this is. They're focused on what's right here.
Yep.
They're focused on what's right with one another. You have a coordinator who is 100% believing in the impact of focusing on what is right. And she leads that by example. You have a board member and parents like Brad and Wendy who talked about the knowing their kids' strengths. I mean, I just thought, wow, they should be my parent mentors. For me as a mom, I was thinking I would love to be immersed in their family dinner time conversation because they are talking about strengths in such a meaningful way that their kids know. They know who they are, they know their authentic self, and they feel completely comfortable in it and know that it's welcomed and encouraged. And so we were just in awe, really, of the level of engagement, the student level of engagement. We had great conversations with students. And then one of the things that Tess and I experience anytime we go to a community, we try to make sure that we visit the local shops and local stores. And so the motel that we stayed in, we were really impressed with this. They had a laminated piece of paper that listed the recommendations from staff for where to go, dining options, coffee shops, shops to visit. Yeah. And I think it honored both of our individualization to be able to see that. Vanessa?
Oh, no.
Veronica? No.
Adriana.
I wasn't even close.
No, my housekeeper. Her name was listed on a little sheet that said, my name is Adriana. I'll be cleaning up after you, which is weird to even think about, and it was listed in my room. And she was one of the people that recommended a place to eat on the sheet, and it said her name and